We're ready. All right, good evening, everybody. I need every spare second that I can to jam-pack all the material that we need to cover. When you're covering the Bible in 4 years, that's the way it is. So turn, if you will, to 1 Samuel chapter 4. Great to see all you guys. Great to see those of you who are gone. Great to see you back. 1 Samuel chapter 4, as we begin our study of God's Word, which is, of course, the second part of our spiritual growth cycle. Worship God, study His Word, love one another, and reach the lost. And let's always be pushing ourselves to make sure we're not getting stuck at this second stage, but that we are reaching out to serve one another and get to know our brethren and connect with one another, and then also reach the lost in any way that we can. So in the last class, I talked about the birth of Samuel, and we talked about Eli, the priest, who was also a judge, and we talked about his two sons. Who were his two sons? Hophni and Phinehas, who were bad news. And I don't have time to really review that in detail, but we're going to today, Lord willing, we're going to cover chapters 4, 5, and 6 of 1 Samuel. So we're going to talk about this battle that the Israelites have with the Philistines and then the aftermath of that battle. Before we do that, if you would bow your head with me in a word of prayer. Our God, our Father, we're so thankful for this day, this class, this opportunity. And I'm thankful for every single person here and for their encouragement. And Father, we're so thankful for this body that you have given, this family that you have given, and we're thankful for this opportunity to learn your word. Pray that we will do that tonight, and that these lessons will be helpful to us, and that they will increase our knowledge and our faith. And through your Son we pray. Amen. I'm not opposed to having other people pray. I just always forget to ask somebody. So I have to start remembering to do that. So before I look in 1 Samuel 4, just a real quick picture I want to show you all that Farrell Jenkins had on his blog, and I was pretty impressed. This is a Philistine temple, and you can see the two pillars there, and this would have been the kind of temple that Samson destroyed when he pushed down the two pillars. And this was not uncommon for Philistine temples. So I just wanted to show you that for illustration purposes. In 1 Samuel chapter 4, the Ark of God is captured. So there's this battle between the Israelites and the Philistines, and they meet in what was the northwestern part of Ephraim, Aphek and Ebenezer. And what is kind of unique about that for the Philistines to be meeting for war up there? Yeah, I mean, you see on this map, the Philistines were normally down here in the tribe of Judah on the coast, but they had made their way all the way up here, which means they're taking more and more land and pushing more and more further north. So they meet here. Now, the text doesn't tell us what triggers this battle, but it's possibly because of Samson's destruction of that temple in Gaza. 3,000 people died. Is that the number? I think that's the number. And so a lot of Philistines died in that destruction of that temple. And so maybe this was their effort to try to take vengeance. We don't know that, but it does seem that the story of Samson doing all of his work was happening at the same time that Samson was a little boy and being raised, being brought up to learn to be a priest and everything under Eli. It seems like all of that was kind of going on at the same time. But we can't prove that. Now I want to read in chapter 4, verses 2 and 3. It says, "The Philistines drew up in battle array to meet Israel. When the battle spread, Israel was defeated before the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 men on the battlefield. When the people came into the camp, the elders of Israel said, 'Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? Let us take to ourselves from Shiloh the ark of the covenant of the Lord, that it may come among us and deliver us from the power of our enemies. Right off the bat, you can see some serious problems with this mentality. First of all, it's an idolatrous mentality. They're basically looking at the ark the same way that other nations might look at their idols. It's a good luck charm. And they didn't even say a word about, well, we need to make sure God is in our midst. What did they say? Let's make sure that box is in our midst. That ornate box, the Ark of the Covenant. It was a very special thing, the Ark of the Covenant. What did it represent?
The history of the nation for a period of time from when they got from.
Right, good. What else did the Ark represent?
Well, it represented some of their history. It had some things in it. Like
Yes. What was in it?
Aaron's rod that budded and some showbread.
Right. It had the manna in it. And it had the tablets of the testimony. So it was very special, but it represented the presence of God, the glory of God among His people and everything. If we have the ark, we'll be victorious. And they really were placing their trust in the wrong place. We're going to talk more about that on Sunday, so I don't want to kind of steal my own thunder. But, we have to be careful not to place our trust in, the wrong things. Maybe outward things. And not placing our trust in God. So they were just placing their trust in this ark, thinking that would give them victory. And so the men were sent to the city of Shiloh. Remember, of course, Shiloh is where Samuel was raised, and that's where Eli was, and that's where the tabernacle was. So they go there and they get the Ark of the Covenant, and they bring it back to where they were. And they brought Hophni and Phinehas with them. And so there's this great rejoicing. We've got the Ark. We're powerful now. The Philistines don't stand a chance. Philistines see what's going on, and what was their sort of attitude?
They were concerned.
Yeah, they were worried. And then they kind of said, well, we're just going to have to fight like men. And fight like men, they do. And in chapter 4 and verses 10 and 11, so the Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated, and every man fled to his tent. And the slaughter was very great, for there fell of Israel 30,000 foot soldiers. And the ark of God was taken, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, died. This was major. Now, first of all, it had been prophesied that Hophni and Phinehas would die. Do you remember the context of that and what was going on when that was prophesied?
They die on the same day.
That they would die on the same day. That a man of God, a prophet, said that to Eli. Because remember what Eli was not doing? That's right. He got on to them, but he didn't remove them from being priests, and they were despising the offering and doing all sorts of terrible things. And so the prophecy was, judgment is coming on your house. And as evidence of this, your two sons are going to die on the same day. That was back in chapter 2. And then, of course, when God communicated to Samuel, the message was, judgment is coming on Eli's house. And Eli's attitude was, well, he's the Lord. That's, I'll accept what the Lord has to say. But he didn't change his ways. He still didn't remove his sons from their position. So they die. The ark is captured, and this is just terrible. And so a soldier escaped, and he ran 10 miles to Shiloh. Now, I don't know if you've ever run 10 miles, but that's a long way to run. And he gets there to bring this news. And Eli is sitting at the gate of the city, the entrance to the city, because he wants to hear the news. And he's old. It mentions he's how old?
98.
He's 98. He can't see well. And this soldier comes and tells him the news, and it's kind of this progressive thing. That, first of all, the Israelites fled from their enemies. That's not good. To make it even worse, there was a great loss of men. That's bad. That's really bad. To make it even worse, your two sons are dead. But the worst news is what? The ark has been captured, and that I mean, just imagine Eli is the high priest. You know, he was the only one that had the right to go into the Holy of Holies where the ark was once a year. I mean, to him it had a really special significance. And to think this thing has been taken into the hand of a pagan nation, this is terrible. And what does he do? He apparently faints and falls backwards. Either way, he just falls backwards and he lands on his neck and he breaks his neck. And I said something inaccurate last class. I don't believe that he was heavy because he ate of the fat of the sacrifices like his sons. I don't think there's any indication he partook of the same sins that his sons did. He was guilty because he did not remove them from their position. But he was heavy, and the text is telling us that because why? It helps us understand why he broke his neck when he fell. And I mean, it's such a sad ending for a man that was he was a judge for 40 years. He was the high priest. He had so much potential to be so much more, but this terrible death is in the text to kind of indicate just the displeasing of God and what a sad ending for this once good man. And at this point, there are no more priests right now. I'm not saying there weren't people who are of the lineage to be priests, but the high priest is dead and his two sons are dead. And I love the point that Brian made in his sermon on Sunday. If you go before the judge and you make the judge mad, and there's nobody to mediate between you and the judge, that's bad. That's really bad. And they didn't really have anybody to mediate for them before this anyway, because his two sons were useless. And he wasn't pleasing to God there at that point. But now they don't have any priests. So, of course, Samuel's going to step up, and God's going to use him as a priest. But this is a bad situation, because this is the judge being angry with the whole nation, and there's nobody to mediate. There's nobody to mediate. The wife of Phinehas, and we're not told her name, she found out about what had happened, and she was very pregnant and just about to give birth. And when she heard the news, she did give birth, and it was a boy. And they tried to lift her spirits, but what was her response? What was her attitude?
The glory has departed.
The glory has departed. She could not rejoice that she had a son. And in fact, the thing that she emphasized wasn't, I'm grieved because my husband died, but what was she grieved over? The ark. The ark has been taken. She names her child Ichabod. The first person I thought of when I thought of Ichabod was Ichabod Crane. And so that's where we're familiar with that name. But what does the word Ichabod mean?
No more glory.
That's right. And really, it's in the Hebrew, it's in the form of a question. It's, where's the glory? In other words, there is none. Where's the glory? So imagine naming your child, where's the glory? That's a terrible name for a child, poor kid. But it was so that it would indicate, if somebody said, Ichabod, why is your name Ichabod? And that could bring back to memory what happened in the nation at that time. And it was just a terrible thing. I also don't want to kind of give a spoiler on this either, because I want to talk about this on Sunday. But if you don't have God in your midst, where's the glory?
It's left.
You don't have the glory. If you don't have Christ in your midst, where's the glory? And we could talk about Revelation 1 and Jesus walking among the lampstands. I'm going to talk about that some on Sunday, Lord willing. But what she said here, she may have had more insight than we may realize about the significance of what was going on. The fact that the ark was taken away was just symbolic of the fact that God was not in the midst of this nation anymore at this point. He was already not, his glory was already departed before the ark was gone. Even when they had the ark, was his glory there with them? No, because God wasn't in their hearts. And that's the point. It's not some external thing. You know, I'm going to talk about, Lord willing, on Sunday, that isn't this building a box? A church building is just a box. And if we're not careful, we place our trust in a box, just like they were placing their trust in a box. It's just this external thing, and that's what's going to save us. And, well, we've got to make sure that we've got God and His will and His Spirit and His Son in our hearts and in our lives and the way that we live, not just some external thing. I'm almost ready to stop. I've got so much material I'm trying to cover. I'm trying to be careful. So I'll stop in just a minute, so save your questions and comments. It seems that the Philistine army made its way also to Shiloh to destroy it at this time. We're not told about that, but it seems that that's the case. What's one indicator that maybe Shiloh was destroyed at this time?
Bob Waldron says it's not mentioned again.
Okay.
As the place where the
That's right.
temple,
The tabernacle was.
is.
And think about this. Later, and we're going to get there tonight, Lord willing, if I talk fast enough. Do they end up bringing the Ark of the Covenant back to Shiloh? Where do they bring it? Kiriath Jearim. Well, it had been in Shiloh for 400 years. I said 300 on Wednesday. That's wrong. It's actually 400 years. So why not bring it to the place it's been for the last 4 centuries? Well, probably because the city of Shiloh was destroyed. And there's a couple of interesting passages in the book of Jeremiah about this. Now, does anybody remember when Jeremiah the prophet did his prophetic work?
It was before Babylon.
Yes. And so it was, and he kept prophesying even after the captivity started, of course, but it was after, remember there was 2 kingdoms. There was the northern kingdom and southern kingdom, and the northern kingdom was taken away because of idolatry, and the southern kingdom was left in the land. Jeremiah's job was to tell the people, you know what? You're going into captivity, and God's going to destroy this temple, and you're wicked and you need to repent. That was his overall message for his career. What a message to have. They didn't like that message. So in Jeremiah 7, he says this in Jeremiah 7 verse 12. God says this through him. But go now to my place which was in Shiloh, where I made my name dwell at the first, and see what I did to it, because of the wickedness of my people Israel. What Jeremiah is saying there is, you don't think the temple's going to be destroyed? You don't think God's really going to destroy this temple? Why don't you go to Shiloh and see what happened to Shiloh where his tabernacle was. And the indication is it's been totally wiped out. Another verse here, Jeremiah 26:6, then I will make this house like Shiloh, talking about the house of God in Jerusalem. And the city I will make a curse to all the nations of the earth. Now add to all of that the fact that excavations have been done that show traces of this devastation. This is a picture in Shiloh that would align with that time period when all of this was going on, and the devastation is obvious. So I think that it's pretty clear that they also went to Shiloh and destroyed that city this time. All right, anybody have any questions or comments? Jason?
I like where you point out that it's kind of symbolic, but it seems Israel, from Eli to his sons to the people's faith in the ark, they had gone to a place like they did later on in Malachi, I think you pointed out last week, where they were honoring form, not substance. And so they had their faith in the priesthood, in the ceremonies, even though the priests had bastardized those ceremonies. They had their faith in objects. And I think part of the reason God took it away, and I think the lesson to us is, lest we put our faith in objects, is that God took it away to get them back to their reliance on Him.
Yeah.
Not on this box.
Right.
Not on Eli.
Yeah.
Not on the priesthood.
Absolutely.
The priesthood and the ark, those were all part of their ability to relate to God, but it was not their relationship with God. It did not provide them any spiritual power or physical power. And to us as Christians, and we see it in modern day, people who claim to be Christians with They got to have that cross, right? And I understand our faith is in the cross, but not in a cross itself, a physical cross.
Right.
It's in what the cross represents spiritually. So it's not in that totem. And if there is no substance behind our faith and our worship, we can come in here and sing the words of these songs all the live long day.
Right.
But if we are not offering these songs as tribute to our God, we're wasting our time as far as worship is concerned.
That's right. All right, Joe?
Now, Eli being the high priest, he would have to have approved them taking the ark out of the tabernacle and taking it out after battle, don't you think? I mean, he would have, they wouldn't have just done that without him. So that may indicate a couple things. That's why he just fell over backwards. He realized he just made a huge mistake.
Good point.
And it may indicate either his ineffectiveness as a high priest at the time, that he could be swayed to do that, or maybe he's corrupt. Maybe he's corrupt in that he didn't ask God, what should I do?
Right.
He had people say, look, we're losing this battle, let's take the ark and go. And he said, okay. And,
Yeah.
you know, and
That would seem to be a safe assumption. Yeah. Of course, we're not specifically told about that, but
Do we have any
if he's a
idea
high
why-
priest, you would assume that he.
Do we have any idea why they lost the first battle? Like, you know, did they do any other reference of why they lost that first battle?
Well, you know, where was their power? Where was their power? You know, the Israelites' power wasn't in their military might. Wasn't in their culture. You know, I mean, if you look at the cultures around, like the Philistines, they had much more impressive pottery and artwork, and their culture was much more advanced in many ways. That, you know, the Israelites weren't impressive in any way, shape, or form, except for the fact that their God was Jehovah. And if God was not in their midst, they're going to lose every time. And that's why they're so weak during the period of the judges, time and time again, because they're not serving God. They're not being true to their covenant. So, good comments. Okay. Joe, we'll move on.
One thing that, when you started out, that was very interesting to me. They were asking, this is back in verse 3, and it said, why has the Lord defeated us? I think that's very interesting because in the Lord is where you have victory.
Yeah.
God didn't defeat them. They defeated themselves.
Right.
They elected to put God out, you know. And I just thought that was very interesting.
Why is the
Instead
Lord
of blaming themselves where the blame should reside, oh, that's God's fault.
Yeah. They do seem to be laying that at His blame, the blame at His feet.
And we can find that in ourselves very, very easily. The devil has a very easy way to get to us when we can start to blame God.
You know, in some ways they were thinking right in the sense that they knew that they could only win if they had God fighting for them, but their conclusion was, well, why has God defeated us? Because we didn't have the ark with us. I mean, like, it's just so ignorant. It's, I don't know, it's well-intentioned ignorance. Like they meant well, but they just weren't. They were not operating with knowledge according to what God's word says. I got to move forward a little bit here. Thank you all for those comments. Very, very good. So then we have the Ark of God in Philistine territory, starting in 1 Samuel 5 and verse 1. And so the Philistines, they're victorious. I mean, they just got the Ark of the Covenant. And where do they bring it? Where do they put it?
Dagon's temple.
And Dagon's temple in the city of Ashdod. Now, of course, the temple in Gaza, a little southwest of Ashdod, was destroyed because Samson had destroyed it. So they couldn't have brought it to that one if they wanted to. They bring it to the temple of Dagon here in Ashdod. Now, you see Dagon, he's a fish god. D-A-G, that part of the word means fish. The Philistines were a sea-dwelling people. So their god was a fish god. And what is the whole idea of, we're going to put this Ark of the Covenant right here in front of our God, our idol? What's the point? Yeah, to show who's really superior and who's subservient. Well, see, the God of the Israelites, he's subservient to our God. We'll put him right here before his idol. And this is just hubris. In chapter 5 and verses 3 and 4. Verse 3, when the Ashdodites arose early the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and set him in his place again. Now just pause there. Think of the hilarity of this. It is humiliating for them, and it's meant to be that way. In the text, it's meant to show how ridiculous these people are for having a fish god, for having some man-made god, and they actually think that this God is superior to the God who created all things. And this god, this idol, falls on his face as if he's falling prostrate before the God of heaven. Now, of course, this God isn't real at all. And think of how ridiculous it must have been. Oh, our God fell over. Well, let's help our God up. He can't get up on his own, so we got to help him up. He can't stand up on his own. And it brings to mind passages like in Isaiah where it talks about, you're taking this wood from a tree and using some of it to warm yourself in the fire, and you're going to bow down and worship another part of it. And you're going to take another part, and you're going to make a peg with it and put it in your house and hang things on it. It's absurd. And these gods can't see or hear or talk or do anything. And they're being worshipped by men. And so, it really is very irrational and illogical when we have man-made gods, even today if it's not an idol. And we actually think that this thing, whatever this entity is that we're worshiping, or whatever this hobby is that we're worshiping, we think that that's where our salvation is, basically. And it's not. There is no salvation outside of Jesus Christ. So anyway, in verse 4, but when they arose early the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord, and the head of Dagon and both of his hands were cut off on the threshold. Only the trunk of Dagon was left to him. Now, I think that there is some symbolism to the fact that his head and hands were cut off. What does the head represent?
The intellect.
Sorry?
The intellect.
The intellect. That's right. Knowledge, wisdom. What do the hands represent?
Activity.
What you do, doing things. This is a God who has no knowledge and who can do nothing. His head and hands are cut off. Now, that may or may not be the meaning, but that's a possible symbolism of the why he lost his head and his hands. And here's what's funny too. At the end of that verse, in the New American Standard, it says only the trunk of Dagon was left to him. In the Hebrew, it reads only Dagon was left to him. In other words, just the fish. If you got a fish god who loses his human head and human hands, what do you have left? You got a fish. And it's humorous that you don't catch that necessarily in our version, but it's humorous that here's this God, and what they're left with is a fish. And it's just, it's pathetic. It's really pathetic. But instead of their deciding, oh, our God is not real, we must worship Jehovah, instead they kind of regard the threshold as having a special importance now, and we're not going to even touch the threshold. We won't step on that anymore because that's where their God fell. And it leads them to the totally wrong conclusion. And irony in all this, Dagon was often associated with military victory. And yet, and that was the whole point. We're victorious. And now they're not looking so victorious, are they? Their God is not victorious at all because he's not real. And they're about to get a whole lot less victorious as the story continues. Because what did God do to the people? He afflicted them with tumors. And as we're going to continue on, people were dying from these tumors. It was very painful and terrible, and it was widespread, the suffering that was going on. And so they decided we need to get rid of this thing and send it from Ashdod to where? Remember where they send it? They send it to Gath. That's another Philistine city. I don't know why they didn't just totally get rid of it. Why they would want to send it to Gath? Well, at Gath, what started happening? Same stuff. We need to get rid of it. Let's send it to another Philistine city. And I bet the people of Ekron were thinking, I don't want it. And I mean, they're just tossing this thing like it's a hot potato. And nobody wants it. And everybody's suffering. And finally at Ekron, they decide, what do they got to do? We got to totally get rid of this thing. So they call for, the rulers of the Philistines call for the priests and the diviners. And this is another case study in well-intentioned ignorance. They're totally ignorant of what would be pleasing to the Lord. But they have good intentions. They don't want to upset Yahweh. And so how should we deal with this? How should we send it back? Well, first of all, the diviners say, you need to send it with what? What do you need to send along with it?
Gold offering.
Yes, a sin offering. And what were the sin offerings?
The golden.
Tumors. Tumors. I'm just trying to resist doing an Arnold Schwarzenegger impression right now. 5 gold tumors. I have no idea what those would have looked like. That was actually pretty common among pagan nations when there was some body part that needed healing, to make an image of that body part and offer that to your God. So they're offering these tumors to Jehovah so that they can be healed from all of this suffering of these tumors. And what else?
Rats. Golden rats.
5 golden rats. Interesting. Waldron suggests in the book it might have been that what was going on was something like the bubonic plague, which spread through mice, through rats, and the fleas that were on them, and there were tumors and death and suffering in the bubonic plague that may have been, the rats may have been involved in that. Apparently the Philistines at least thought that rats were involved in that, because they offered these rats up, these golden rats, and there were 5. Why were there 5 tumors and 5 rats?
For the city.
All right, for the 5 Philistine rulers of these 5 cities, Ekron, Ashdod, Gath, Ashkelon, and Gaza. And, again, this is all showing that the Philistines, they're not victorious anymore. Yeah, they had their moment of victory, and God allowed them to do that, but now they have been brought low. He has humbled all of these great cities of Gaza and brought them to their knees, to the point that they're basically begging him, please have mercy on us.
He's teaching them the difference of the victory they had. They had a victory over Israel, and they thought they had defeated Jehovah. And see, what we're learning here is, while Israel needed Jehovah to defeat the Philistines, Jehovah did not need Israel to defeat the Philistines.
Right, that's a good point. I like that.
That is the lesson he's teaching them. It's basically saying, I let you defeat my people.
Yeah.
If I wanted you defeated, I would defeat you.
Good point. So another part of their advice was, you need to put the ark on a what? On a cart.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh, Bill. on a cart, on a new cart. Now remember that, because later King David is going to have the ark put on a cart. Wonder where he got the idea. You see? I mean, this would have been well known by that time, and that's later in the United Kingdom. But remember that, because that's in 2 Samuel 6, and we'll be studying that much later. But keep this in mind. So they decide to have it put on a cart, and they're going to hook it up to 2 cows that are mama cows. And they've got calves. Now, if you've got 2 cows that have never been yoked, are they going to want to go in the same direction? I have no experience in this, but I can imagine it'd be difficult. And they'd probably be resisting and all that. And if they are mama cows, and if they have baby cows, where are they going to want to be? With their babies, with their calves.
To feed them.
To feed them. And so the thinking of these diviners and priests is this. If these two cows go the same direction and they go straight to the land of Judah, they go to Beth Shemesh, then all this suffering and everything is from God. Why would they assume that would be kind of like supernatural if these cows went straight there? That would be totally contrary to nature. In fact, later, when they do actually send them away, the cows are lowing as they go. Why? They want to be with their babies, but they're going straight. They're going straight to Beth Shemesh. What, ma'am?
I said maybe they were calling the babies.
Come, follow us. Maybe, but it's just interesting, isn't it? And so this is, superstitious on their part, but God does use this occasion to give glory to His name, and He causes all of that to happen. And so from Ekron to Beth Shemesh, the cows go, and the Philistines kind of follow along as they're watching what's going on. And then the ark arrives at Beth Shemesh. Now, Beth Shemesh, house of the sun, was a priestly city. A priestly city. So this would be a place that you would expect for these people to know the law of God and all of that. So keep that in mind. And let's read chapter 6, beginning of verse 13. Now the people of Beth Shemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley. That's around May or June. So they're all outside. And they raised their eyes and saw the ark, and were glad to see it. The ark came into the field of Joshua, the Beth Shemite, who stood there where there was a large stone, and they split the wood of the cart and offered the cows as a burnt offering to the Lord. So here's a picture of Beth Shemesh. Beth would be pronounced Beit, but that's fine. This is the area right here that is believed to be the very area where the ark returned. We can't know that. That's tradition. Verse 15, the Levites took down the ark of the Lord and the box that was with it, in which were the articles of gold, and put them on the large stone. And the men of Beth Shemesh offered burnt offerings and sacrificed sacrifices that day to the Lord. When the 5 lords of the Philistines saw it, they returned to Ekron that day. And so they, again, have been humiliated and really defeated in this whole process. Now, the story could have ended well, but what did the Israelites do to mess it up? They open it up. In Numbers chapter 4, the instruction is for even the Kohathites not to even look upon the holy items that were uncovered, or they would die. Here, they're actually looking inside of it to see all that stuff we talked about earlier. And this is a priestly city. And so many people died. In fact, it says 50,070. Now, scholars are pretty well agreed that there is some corruption in the text and the copying of those numbers. Actually, literally, the text says, he smote among the people 70 men, 50,000 men. So it's not actually listed as one number. And so it's just kind of confusing what to do with that 50,000. Is it supposed to say 5,000? Does it mean 70 of 5,000 or whatever? But there weren't 50,000 people in Beth Shemesh. There were hardly 70,000 in Jerusalem. But anyway, this is just a small, village. But God struck the people with a great, blow. And it's ironic that the Philistines, this pagan, wicked nation, showed more reverence for the ark than the Israelites did. Think about that. Than even the Levites. The Philistines wouldn't even dare to look into it. They were trying to show respect. But the Israelites, they're just looking at it. Isn't it a shame when people of the world have higher standards than Christians and show more reverence in many ways than some Christians do? It's a shame. And so we need to show reverence to God by knowing His Word and keeping it very, very carefully. What's going on in Beth Shemesh was, I don't think it was just well-intentioned ignorance. I think that it was willful ignorance. Didn't they know not to do that? Sometimes we're willfully ignorant when we want to do something bad enough. So that's the lesson for you tonight. Please. I just need to mention this real quick. So they end up bringing the ark to Kiriath Jearim, as we mentioned. It's going to be there until the days of David. So it's 120 years later when David's going to bring it from there to Jerusalem. So please read through page 119.